Jeremy. Today's day 384 of reading, trading, HarryPotter and Order of the Phoenix. Let's get started. We are currently on page 209. What were you saying before the sorting? Hermione asked the ghost. About the hat giving warnings? Oh, yes, said Nick, who seemed glad of reason to turn away from Ron, who was now eating roast potatoes with almost indecent enthusiasm. Yes, I have heard the hat give several warnings before, always at times when it detects periods of great danger for the school. And always, of course, its advice is the same. Stand together, be strong from within. Outgunnit no schools in danger, is that? Said Ron. His mouth was so full, Harry thought it was quite an achievement for him to make any noise at all. I beg your pardon, said nearly headless Nick politely, while Hermione looked revolted. Ron gave an enormous swallow and said, How can it know if the school's in danger if it's a hat? I have no idea, said nearly headless Nick. Of course, it lives in Dumbledore's office, so I dare say it picks up there. And it wants all the houses to be friends, said Harry, looking over at the Slytherin table, where Draco Malfoy was holding court. Fat chance. Well, now, you shouldn't take that attitude, said Nick reprovingly. Peaceful cooperation, that's the key. We ghosts, though we belong to separate houses, maintain links of friendship. In spite of the competitiveness between Gryffindor and Slytherin, I would never dream of seeking an argument with the bloody Baron. Only because you're terrified of him, said Ron. Nearly headless Nick looked highly affronted. Terrified? I hope I, Sir Nicholas and Mimsy Porpington, have never been guilty of cowardice in my life. The noble blood that runs in my veins. What blood? Said Ron. Surely you haven't still got... It's a figure of speech, said nearly headless Nick, now so annoyed his head was trembling ominously on his partially severed neck. I assume I am still allowed to enjoy the use of whichever words I like, even if the pleasures of eating and drinking are denied me. But I am quite used to students poking fun at my death, I assure you. Nick, he wasn't really laughing at you, said Hermione, throwing a furious look at Ron. Unfortunately, Ron's mouth was packed to the exploding point again, and all he could manage was nod idem intub skew, which Nick did not seem to think constituted as an adequate apology. Rising into the air, he straightened his feathered hat and swept away from them to the other end of the table, coming to rest between the Creevy brothers, Colin and Dennis. Well done, Ron, snapped Hermione. What? Said Ron indignantly, having managed finally to swallow his food. I'm not allowed to ask a simple question? Oh, forget it, said Hermione irritably, and the pair of them spent the rest of the meal in huffy silence. Harry was too used to their bickering to bother trying to reconcile them. He felt it was better use of his time to eat his way steadily through his steak and kidney pie than a large plateful of his favorite treacle tart. When all the students had finished eating and the noise level in the hall was starting to creep upward again, Dumbledore got to his feet once more. Talking ceased immediately as all turned to face the headmaster. Harry was feeling pleasantly drowsy now. His four-poster bed was waiting somewhere above, wonderfully warm and soft. Well, now that we are all digesting another magnificent feast, I beg a few moments of your attention for the usual start of term notices, said Dumbledore. First years ought to know that the forest in the grounds is out of bounds to students, and a few of our older students ought to know that by now, too. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged smirks. Mr. Filch, the caretaker, has asked me for what he tells me is the 462nd time to remind you that all magic is not permitted in the corridors between classes. There are a number of other things, all of which can be checked on the extensive list now fastened to Mr. Filch's office door. We have had 2 changes in staffing this year. We are very pleased to welcome back Professor Grubbly Plank, who will be taking care of magical creature lessons. We are also delighted to introduce Professor Umbridge, our new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. There was a round of polite but fairly unenthusiastic applause, during which Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged slightly panicked looks. Dumbledore had not said for how long Grubbly Plank would be teaching. Dumbledore continued, "Tryouts for the Quidditch teams will take place on the—" He broke off, looking inquiringly at Professor Umbridge, as she was not much taller standing than sitting. There was a moment when nobody understood why Dumbledore had stopped talking, but then Professor Umbridge said, it became clear that she had got to her feet and was intending to make a speech. Dumbledore only looked taken aback for a moment, then sat back down smartly and looked alertly at Professor Umbridge, as though he desired nothing better than to listen to her talk. Other members of the staff were not as adept at hiding their surprise. Professor Sprout's eyebrows had disappeared into her flyaway hair, and Professor McGonagall's mouth was as thin as Harry had ever seen it. No new teacher had ever interrupted Dumbledore before. Many of the students were smirking. This woman obviously did not know how things were done at Hogwarts. "Thank you, Headmaster," Professor Umbridge simpered, "for those kind words of welcome." Her voice was high-pitched, breathy, and a little girlish, and again Harry felt a powerful rush of dislike that he could not explain to himself. All he knew was that he loathed everything about her, from her stupid voice to her fluffy pink cardigan. She gave another little throat-clearing cough, and continued, "Well, it is lovely to be back at Hogwarts, I must say." She smiled, revealing very pointed teeth, "and to see such happy little faces looking back at me." Harry glanced around. None of the faces he could see looked happy. On the contrary, they all looked rather taken aback at being addressed as though they were 5-year-olds. "I am very much looking forward to get to know you all, and I'm sure we'll be very good friends." Students exchanged looked at this. Some of them were barely concealing grins. "I'll be her friend as long as I don't have to borrow that cardigan," Parvati whispered to Lavender, and both of them lapsed into silent giggles. Professor Umbridge cleared her throat again. But when she continued, some of the breathiness had vanished from her voice. She sounded much more businesslike, and now her words had a dull, learned-by-heart sound to them. "The Ministry of Magic has always considered the education of young wizards and wizards to be of vital importance. The rare gifts of which with you were born may come to nothing if not nurtured and honed by careful instruction. The ancient skills unique to the wizarding community must be passed down through the generations, lest we lose them forever. The treasure trove of magical knowledge amassed by our ancestors must be guarded, replenished, and polished by those who have been called to the noble profession of teaching." Professor Umbridge paused here and made a little bow to her fellow staff members, none of whom bowed back. Professor McGonagall's dark eyebrows had contracted so that she looked positively hawk-like, and Harry distinctly saw her exchange a significant glance with Professor Sprout, as Umbridge gave another little and went on with her speech. "Every headmaster and headmistress of Hogwarts has brought something new to the weighty task of governing this historic school. And that is as it should be, for without progress there will be stagnation and decay. There again, progress for progress's sake must be discouraged, for our tried and tested traditions often require no tinkering. A balance, then, between old and new, between permanence and change, between tradition and innovation. Harry found his attentiveness ebbing, as though his brain was slipping in and out of tune. The quiet that always filled the hall when Dumbledore was speaking was breaking up as students put their heads together, whispering and giggling. Over at the Ravenclaw table, Cho Chang was chatting animatedly with her friend. A few seats along from Cho, Luna Lovegood had got out the quibbler again. Meanwhile, at the Hufflepuff table, Ernie Macmillan was one of the few still staring at Professor Umbridge, but he was glassy-eyed, and Harry was sure that he was only pretending to listen in an attempt to live up to the new prefect's badge gleaming on his chest. Professor Umbridge did not seem to notice the restlessness of her audience. Harry had the impression that a full-scale riot could have broken out under his nose, and she would have plowed on with her speech. The teachers, however, were listening very attentively, and Hermione seemed to be drinking in every word Umbridge spoke, though, judging by her expression, they were not all to her taste, because some changes will be for the better, while others will come in fullness of the time to be recognized as errors of judgment. Meanwhile, some old habits will be retained, and rightly so, whereas others, outmoded and outworn, must be abandoned. Let us move forward, then, into a new era of openness, effectiveness, and accountability, intent on preserving what ought to be preserved, perfecting. Thank you, everyone. That's all for today. Bye. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to page 214. Bookmark will close. Peace out.